Thank you for coming to the Westchester Church Christmas concert. You may be seated. It's an honor to have you. If this is your first time here, we're honored that you are here. And it's a good day. It's a good day. If you're a guest here, if this is your first time here, if you consider yourself a guest, thank you so much for coming. We are honored to have you. Whenever I began to think about something to preach about and speak about this evening, there was two-word sentences that kept flooding in my mind. And the first one was good news. And the second one was great joy. Good news and great joy. Good news and great joy. Good news and great joy. Something you really don't find in the 21st century. The news, that word news, the news has always been a major part in my life for various reasons. Growing up, we had one of those TVs that were like this big, like from the front to the back, like this big, and then there was two antenna ears that went out the top of it. Anybody born in from 2000 and on probably has no idea what I'm talking about. But we had these two antenna ears, and we would take tinfoil, and we'd stick tinfoil on top of the ears and move it around. And we only had 3 stations. We had Channel 7, KPLC, and then we had PBS, Channel 18, and we had Fox 29. Those were the 3 stations. And if we knew what was coming on, this is a novel thought, we had to get a newspaper, and they had a section in the newspaper that would tell you what was running on those 3 stations. It's pretty, and we kind of had a leg up in our family because my dad, who was an accountant by day, was a newspaper carrier by night. So we always got the news early. As in, my dad would wake up at 2 o'clock every morning. He did it for over 20 years. Still have no clue how he did it for that long. But for over 20 years, my dad would wake up at 2 o'clock in the morning to deliver the news. He would go to the pickup place, and he'd get however many papers he'd get up. And for the next hour and a half to 2 hours, my dad would deliver the news. And he'd let me go with him in the summer. And it was terrible. It was a terrible experience, especially whenever it was cold and raining, and you had the fresh scent of that ink off of the paper. All of your senses are in that very confined Geo Metro. That's a standard. It was a standard Geo Metro. My dad would never hit the brakes as he was going down the street. He had a stack of papers right here, and he was so good. He would have me sitting on the side, rubber banding the ones that he had to throw over the car. And so he'd drive with his right hand. He's got his foot, one foot on the gas, the other foot on the shift, and he would throw his hand over here, shift, grab a piece of paper box, over the top, paper box. Dad never missed either. It was like if he was throwing over the top, it was landing right in the middle of that driveway. He was so good. But we got the news. We got the news early. And I remember making deals with my parents about the nightly news because the nightly news came on at 10 on Channel 7, KPLC, Channel 7. And I was like, look, the sports doesn't really come on until about 10:25. And if I don't get to watch the sports, we didn't have ESPN. And we didn't have an app that give you up to date. It was like, if I don't get to watch the sports at 10:25, I have to wait till the next morning to know who won. That is a terrible thought. What a terrible thought. Thank goodness for the iPhone. But it definitely taught us patience. But the news has always been one of the newspapers was in sections. It was in section A, B, and C. And then each page in a section. So it was like A1, A2, A3, A4, B1, B2, B3, B4, C1, C2. And you get, and then on the holidays they expanded. I never liked traveling on the holidays. But tucked into the back of section A, they would have the good news page. where they would have a few comics, and then they would have good news stories and happy stories. So you would have like 50 pages of news and 1 page of good news. 50 pages of news, 1 page of good news. We hear words and catchphrases in the day that we currently live. We hear things like, these are unprecedented times, or history is going to judge us. Or we hear things like, everything is at stake. Seems like everything's at stake every single day, and the ox is always in the ditch. Because bad news is like a drug that we just can't seem to shake. There's talking about layoffs maybe at work, or slowdowns in the economy. There's flare-ups in the Middle East. There's downturns in the housing market. There's upswings in global warming. Does North Korea have nukes, or does North Korea not have nukes? Who knows? Are Washington politicians ever going to play nice with each other? Who knows? At least they're not like Hamilton and Burr and going off to Jersey together. Let's hope not, at least. Oh yeah, and there's somewhere someone scheming about your taxes right now. To my Connect group, I promise I will not go off on New York State taxes, even though it is very, very tempting. And if you're not in a Connect group, you need to get in a Connect group. They're a lot of fun. Get together every week, do life together, and complain about New York State taxes. Commercial breaks over, back to the sermon. But humanity, since the beginning of time, has a knack to embrace bad news. It's really nothing new. And around 4 BC, in ancient Israel, there was a lot of bad news. National pride was at an all-time low because of their leader, Herod the Great. Their religion was overrun with deadness and immoral preachers, nothing but tradition and no fresh word from God for 400 years. And I'll tell you, nothing can turn people off to religion like dead traditions and immoral preachers. They had no word from God for over 400 years. 50% of the populations were slaves, and they had sunk into the depths of immorality like they had in no other period of history. Their politicians were at a time where they were constantly calling for taxes. And yes, I'm talking about 4 BC, not 2019, even though they do seem to run a close parallel. Bad news abounded in ancient Israel. The Jewish people were living under the rule of Herod the Great. He had forced Roman rule on local people at a local level. This dude was so bad he killed 2 brother-in-laws. He killed his wife. He killed his 2 sons. And I found a very interesting fact about Herod the Great. He knew that nobody liked him. And so right before he died, he ordered a mass execution to be carried out on the day of his death, just so there was a proper atmosphere in the country. They didn't want anybody celebrating. And it was in this atmosphere, under the rule of this man, that wise men from the east gain an audience in his palace, and they proclaim, and they said in Matthew chapter 2, it says, "Where is he? Where is he that is born King of the Jews?" Herod had to be thinking, I'm right here. I am the King of the Jews. And then they continued, they said, but we've seen his star in the east, and we have come to worship him. And when Herod heard these things, he was troubled, and all Jerusalem with him. And he sent them to Bethlehem and said, go and search diligently for the child, and when you have found him, bring me word again, that I may come and worship him. At this point in history, I hate to mess up your little nativity scene, but Jesus is about 2 years old during this time period. And at the stakes of humanity had never been higher, because Herod is not interested in worship. Herod is interested in murder. As a matter of fact, he is going to murder every child 2 years and younger during this period in time. But let's rewind those 2 years. Let's look and see what's happening those 2 years previous. In the midst of a chaotic nation, in the middle of a national depression, in the middle of a bunch of bad news. I'm glad they didn't have 24-hour news cycles. In the middle of it all, in the middle of the worst time in their history, where they haven't heard a prophet in 400 years, where there's no word from God in 400 years, where they're just literally going through traditional motions, God decides now would be a great time to implement my good news plan. And God puts His good news into action in a very unique way. I don't know that I would have done it the same way that God did it. This is what God did. He entrusted Himself to 2 teenagers. Yeah. In the modern United States, every year millions of teenage girls become pregnant out of wedlock, and unfortunately it has become too common. But stepping back into first century Jewish culture, the law regarded a pregnant woman out of wedlock as an adulteress who should be stoned. And God decides His master plan should come through a virgin teenage girl who can't really tell her story. Last night I began to read the Jesus birth account, and I began to tremble to think about the fact that the fate of the world and the fate of humanity and the fate of salvation itself rested upon the response of 2 teenagers. How many times did Mary have to remember the angel's words as she felt a Son of God kick against her body? My wife's done it 3 times. And we're done. That's not the big announcement at the end of service. We're really done. After I put that on Facebook, hey, big announcement coming Sunday, we started getting text messages. Is it number 4? Like, no, it's not number 4. But how many times did she have to how many times did Joseph second guess his own encounter with an angel? As a hot shame of living in a town could be seen in the changing shape of his fiance's body. 9 months of awkward explanations and a lingering scent of scandal in town. 9 months. It's almost as if God arranged the most humiliating circumstance and the most humiliating atmosphere possible for His interest, for His entrance into the world, simply to avoid favoritism. And it makes Mary's response so special because she's the first person to accept Jesus on His terms, regardless of personal cost. She had no choice. So these 2 teenagers, Mary and Joseph, make their way to Bethlehem to pay their taxes. They find shelter in a stable. In the middle of giving birth that night, there are shepherds on a hill, and the angels appear to them. And Luke chapter 2, verse 10, it says, then the angel said unto them, I love this. It says, do not be afraid or fear not. Yeah, okay, I'm just doing my job. And the heavens open up and angels show up and they're like, hey, don't be afraid. You got to remember, this is a nation that hasn't heard from heaven in 400 years. Don't be afraid. And here's why. I bring you good news. I bring you good news of great joy that will be for all people. I bring you good news of great joy that will be for all people. Even in the midst of all of the bad, Jesus has a way of showing up. Whenever everything seems to be falling apart, Jesus has a way of showing up. The reason why is because that's just what Jesus does. Jesus shows up with good news in the middle of all the bad news. In the middle of pain, Jesus shows up. In the middle of struggle, Jesus shows up. In the middle of disappointment, Jesus shows up. In the middle of hurt, Jesus shows up. In the middle of all of the bad news, Jesus has a way of showing up in the middle of your life whenever it doesn't seem like anything good can happen. In the middle of it all, fear not, I bring you good news of great joy for all people. But here's what we have to understand, and here's what we don't like. We love the fact that Jesus shows up. But here's what we don't like. Jesus never shows up on your terms. Jesus doesn't show up when you want him to. Ask Mary and Martha at the tomb of Lazarus, if you would have been here, our brother would be alive. He has a process all on his own, and he really didn't ask our opinion. And that's frustrating, because if anyone is like me, I'm a little bit of a control freak. And I'm not going to lie to you, I've tried to control Jesus a couple times in my life. It didn't work out too well for me. Israel at this time, they wanted a mighty warrior, a mighty Messiah to split the eastern sky and come save them from the terrible empire of Rome. But what did they get? They got a baby wrapped in swaddling clothes laying in a manger that nobody knew about. Luke 2:52 tells us about this process. We want instant change in our life, and what we get is process. I love this. It says, and Jesus grew. Jesus grew in wisdom and stature and in favor with God and men. We want wisdom. We want stature. And we want favor. We want it with God and we want it with men. We just don't want to grow into it. We just want it. We want wisdom and stature and favor, but it's not something you can just obtain. It's something you have to grow into. Relationships don't just happen. You want wisdom to be a better parent? You got to grow into it. You want wisdom to be a better spouse? You have to grow into it. You want favor on your job? You have to do a good job to get favor. You have to grow into it. There's some things that you've got to grow into. If you're a guest here today, if this is your first time here, I'm going to challenge you this year. I'm going to challenge you to give Westchester Church a chance. Give Jesus a chance for 1 year of your life and see if you're better at the end of the year. Because this is not a church. Yes, I'm commercial breaking here. But this isn't a church that pushes relationship with religion. But rather, Jesus Christ, and that's all. I got the privilege to talk to a lady who works for a news company recently. And in the course of conversation, we began to talk about religion, and I was talking about Westchester Church, and I made the comment, I said, what I love about Westchester Church is because it's not necessarily in the traditional sense. It's we believe that Jesus is enough, and that's just it. Since when is Jesus not enough in our world? Since when can we not grow in Him? When the angels showed up that evening, they said, fear not, because I bring you good news of great joy for all people. Unto you this day in the city of David is a Savior born. I'm sure you've seen the bumper sticker or heard the saying that Jesus is the reason for the season. Anybody? Jesus is the reason for the season? Anybody? No? Yes? Anybody ever heard that? Jesus is the reason for the season? What if I took that a little bit deeper and said that Jesus wasn't the reason for the season? What if I said you were the reason for the season? Because if you weren't here, Jesus would have never came. If you didn't breathe, Jesus would have never been born. If you didn't exist, Jesus would have never gone to a cross. If we didn't have sin in our lives, there would have been no need for the Son of Man to become. There would have been no need for God to robe himself in flesh and become a man. It's because of you, and it's because of me. If you're sitting in this room, it tells me that you're willing to give Jesus a chance. And that's really, really good news. I'm not saying that everything in 2020 is going to be perfect. But in the middle of any bad news, if you have Jesus centered right in the center of your bad news, you can get through anything. There is a bag right there with like a green handle. Nathan, can you bring that to me? Or that's it right there. Does anybody have a nativity scene set up in their house? No? Yes? We have a nativity scene set up in our house, and it is nice. It's really nice. It's so nice, I put it right there with my kids to play with. Here's Jesus. I told you it's nice. We got Jesus right in the center of our little nativity scene. Whoop. And then we've got, we got Mary and Joseph. This really isn't Mary. Mary has disappeared. If anybody knows where Mary is at the Willis house, please let us know. Mary's disappeared. An angel's going to be Mary. Things just kind of disappear in our house. We don't know, and we don't care. It'll show up. Because we're worse than the kids. I'm about to really completely tell us. Whenever we were trying to get those drums, we thought we'd be nice and fancy and spray paint them yesterday. But one of those cans had complete pressurized, and whenever we took the cap off, it decided, we did it obviously in the office where, you open cans of spray paint. And now all of a sudden the walls in the office and even the computer screen is covered in blue spray paint. It's a thing of beauty. Absolutely. It wasn't even Elliot's fault. It was his parents. They need help. They need a lot of help. But yeah, we got Jesus here. We got Joseph and Mary, and then there were some shepherds that came. We don't know where the shepherd is, so we got sheep. I tell you, we're fancy at the Willis house. And then there's 3 wise men, or his tradition says there's 3 wise men. We don't know. Nobody knows. But there are some wise men there. They're all around Jesus. This is the normal nativity scene. Right here. This is the traditional nativity scene. Like I said, Jesus was about 2 years old whenever the wise men finally got there, but we'll go with this. So, but here's what we like to do a lot of times in our lives, and musicians can come. Here's what we like to do a lot of times in our lives. We like Jesus in our life. Does everybody like Jesus in our life? You want Jesus there. But we're going to stick him off to the side. He's just kind of like there, but not really there. Because first people to see Jesus was shepherds. Where'd they come from? They came from work. A lot of times, work is really the center. Jesus is there, but work. Gotta pay the bills. Gotta do it. Work is really the center. And whenever work's the center, good luck with everything else. Jesus will get to you whenever you can. For some, let's look at these wise men. Wise men are the center of our nativity. Gold, frankincense, and myrrh. I don't know who brings gold, frankincense, and myrrh to a baby shower. Yeah, what are they thinking? You bring diapers. But this is the center of a lot of our lives, like money, fame, fortune, the center. But you know what happens? Whenever all that is in the center of your life, eventually one day it's all going to disappear. Now, there's something else that people like to put in the center of life, right here. And this is one that we promote and we love, and it's awesome. We got Joseph and Mary. Family, marriage, home. And we think, oh, that's awesome. family in the center. But what happens whenever there's one fight? What happens whenever the kids irritate your nerves? What happens whenever, it's just kind of like, good center you had there. And whenever Jesus isn't in the center, everything is chaos. But look what happens whenever Jesus becomes the center. Everything else finds its proper place, and everything else has a place. Because whenever it's work in the center, there's some other things that are going to have to give way. Whenever it's money, fame, and fortune, frankincense, and myrrh, and gold, and that's the goal. Everything else is something's going to have to give. Whenever it's all about the relationship, eventually one bad moment, one bad conversation can cause friction. But whenever Jesus is anchoring everything has a proper place. And there are angels that look at all the bad news and they think about the fact that the God of all creation, that the God that created all of the universe, the God that created every single galaxy, that same God would look down at the third rock from the sun and say, yeah, I'm going to go there. Why? No wonder the angels sang. They're like, that's some good news for all of those people. That the God that created it all would go there. This is good news. Whenever Jesus is at the center, finances are taken care of. When Jesus is at the center, the job finds its proper place. When Jesus is at the center, the relationship works. There's good news. And today changes everything. Today changes everything. I hope that there was something said today or done today that makes you consider everything. I'm a list person by nature. I like my lists 1, 2, 3, 4. And you would think it'd be, number 1, God, number 2, family, number 3, church, number 4, number 5. But what if we looked at things differently? What if instead of saying God then family, or God then work, or God then life, we said God in my family? Rather than God then work, we said God in my work. Instead of saying God then my finances, we said God in my finances. And we stuck Jesus right in the center of it all. Why don't you stand with me? Every Sunday at Westchester Church, we have a custom that we end the church service all coming together at a time that we call family prayer. What we do is we all step out of the aisle and we come to the front and we just pray. And the reason why we do this is because we believe that there is no greater way to end our Sunday service and begin our work week than with a time of prayer. And not just prayer, but unified prayer together. Whenever you can find somebody and pray with them. Whenever you can bear one another's needs together. whenever you can say, hey, do you mind if I pray with you? Because there is great power whenever you know that you're not doing this thing alone. And so that's kind of how we like to end our church services. It's not pressurized. It's completely optional. But we just like to give everyone the opportunity to simply say, you know what? I want to start my Monday on a good note. So on my Sunday, I'm going to end it with prayer. And there's going to be a leftover and a residue from this prayer that's going to go with you. And I think that's pretty good news. The fact that you can carry Jesus into your week. Jesus will go with you on Monday. So at this time, I'm inviting everyone in the room to come with your family or whoever you come to church with. Come gather at the front. And for a time of prayer and a time of singing. You can sing, you can pray, but let's simply touch heaven together. So as they begin to sing, please make your way to the front. God bless you.